London. This is the second in my occasional series of bookshelf safari vlogs where I take you on a tour of my quite large collection of language learning books, and I'm going to pull out 3 to talk about today. If you're new here, welcome. I'm Dr. Gareth Popkins. Here we talk about language learning from many angles. My own language learning projects, tips, advice, reviews, interviews with inspiring language learners, and a bit of language related vlogging. If you haven't yet subscribed for the vibe, please do, and you can get my free Language Learner Pro training by following the link underneath this video. Now, let's go along the shelves. So, 3 books today. 2 have a Slavic theme, 1 is rather more exotic, at least from where I'm sitting. What I want to start with, though, is one of the books that I've used as an upper intermediate advanced Russian learner, and it's Using Russian, a Guide to Contemporary Usage by Derek Offord. This is in a series from Cambridge University Press. You can still get it. There's one also focusing on Russian vocabulary, and several other languages are covered, such as German, French, Spanish. Now, this is really a manual to the language usage, as the title would suggest. So it starts with varieties of language and register, problems of meaning. There's a section on idioms, there's a section on language in everyday life, covering things like giving telephone numbers, currency, time, measurements. Sections on word formation, which could be quite good for expanding your vocabulary. On syntax, use of prepositions. What you have in each section is a bit of a narrative explanation, and then lots of examples of words. They tend to be presented as individual words, but there are also sections with chunks of language as well. And for example, there's a section in problems of translation. There's a section on difficult English words which have multiple different translations in Russian. For example, the word stop, which can mean many things in English, but has different translations in Russian. To bring to a halt, to come to an end, to give up, to prevent somebody from doing something, to detain, to plug or seal. All these different senses of the word to stop are explained in Russian, and Offord did this for quite a few different words which are difficult to translate into English. There's a section on inflection, tense endings as well. This, I think, is something that you would dip in and out of for reference once you've already got a good understanding of the landscape of Russian. You're familiar with all the main structures, and you're trying to write the language, use the language, and fine-tune what you're doing. It's not a freestanding course. I think it is something you dip in and out of rather than reading from cover to cover or working through systematically. So that's number 1 today. Next, I want to pull out something which, for me at least, is a bit more exotic, and that is Indonesian. This is Teach Yourself Complete Indonesian. I'm an old fan, though, of the Teach Yourself series. I've been using them for 30 years or more since I started as an adult independent language learner. What I like about them is that you have got a pretty full course. It says complete within 2 covers. You can get on top of all the most common language and grammar patterns and a good core vocabulary in one place. They also have audio with them. This came actually with a CD, although this audio now is available to download online. You can get it for free. You have to enter your details, create an account on their website, but you can then get the audio. What I like about the more recent volumes in this series is that they are very conversationally based. In this course there are 17 units, and each one obviously progressively introduces new grammar patterns, but also they're organised around different common situations, everyday situations. So welcome to Indonesia at the airport at the beginning, through things like family and home, invitations, tourist information, one set of dialogues about eating out, hobbies, making a phone call at the doctor's, that sort of thing. And each unit starts with a short conversation, so you can work with some audio first, perhaps do some dictation, get interactive with the material, and then the vocab is introduced. There's then a translation into English, then a bit of explanation and some exercises. So I think you've got everything that you need there. And there's a second dialogue as well in each unit. So I really do like this dialogue-based approach. And I think this is, you know, something which you could really use as the core backbone for learning Indonesian or one of the other languages that are covered in the series. I think sometimes the audio is a bit long-winded. There's a bit too much English explanation. Sometimes the audio can be a bit bitty in these series, but nevertheless, I'm a fan. So I used this when I was learning Indonesian back in 2016. I also went on a language course in Indonesia. I vlogged about it at the time. I'll link to the playlist underneath this video. And I certainly want to go back to Indonesian at some point in the future. A fascinating language and not too difficult when you're starting out, actually, compared with other Asian languages around about. For the third and final book this time, we're back in the Slavic world, and here we have Monica Partridge's Serbo-Croat, a practical grammar and reader. This is a book from 1991, actually published in the old Yugoslavia by the Prosveta publisher in Belgrade. Excuse my pronunciation. Partridge was a professor of Slavonic studies in the University of Nottingham. Now, the first thing that would strike you about this book, it's been on my shelf since 1991 or shortly afterwards, is of course the title. That the language is called Serbo-Croat, whereas today we would tend to talk about Serbian, Croatian, Bosnian, reflecting the political changes and reminding ourselves, I suppose, that what we call a language is always really also partly political. Because I grew up with Yugoslavia and the language as Serbo-Croat, I tend to think of it still as such. And it's interesting to see how the language, or the two languages, are dealt with in this book. This book is quite traditionally organised. Each chapter really foregrounds a new grammatical point rather than a situation such as being at the doctor's or at the airport, as we saw with the more modern, I suppose, Teach Yourself Indonesian. And it covers very thoroughly, I think, most aspects of the patterns of the languages, or of the language, all the cases, declensions, the numeral system, tenses, and so on. Quite a bit of cultural information here too. But each unit is pretty varied. It often starts with a short text. I'm looking now at lesson 3, a short text, only maybe 150 words long or so, with a translation. Then there's a word list. Then you get some explicit grammatical explanation, a couple of sides usually, 3 or 4, 5, 6 sides. Quite a lot of detail. And then at the end you get a number of exercises, very short again, perhaps 5 or 6 sentences to translate in both directions really. At the end of each unit there is a text for reading often, and if we look at lesson 11 for example, which deals mainly with the formation of the future tense, we do have at the end then some exercises and then a couple of reading extracts. The interesting thing is that one of them is taken from the Eastern form of the language, Serbian, Ikavian as she calls it, and then there's a separate extract, completely different extract, in Ikavian, the Western version, or Croatian. So in this chapter we've got from Serbian an extract from a novel about partisan fighting published in 1950, and for the Western form, or Croatian, we've got a passage adapted from Vyacheslav Kaleb's novel, again about partisans in the Second World War, also published in the 1950s. So that's an interesting approach, and all the Serbian extracts are printed in the Cyrillic alphabet. So if one worked through this book, there wouldn't be any audio resources, but you would be familiar with how to read the language in both alphabets and some of the differences, particularly in vocab and such structural differences as there are between the two languages. And you'd also have a pretty good, solid core vocabulary, although whether this is based on frequency of words and so on, I'm not sure. But it's one I thought I'd show you of historical interest. I do have more modern texts on Serbo-Croat, and I've often thought if I were to learn another Slavic language in addition to Russian, this would be the one. I think I'd choose Serbian, as we'd say today, and I have things like colloquial Serbian on my shelf, but I might be tempted to work through this book as well because it's so thorough and it does deal with the both the Western and the Eastern forms of the language. That's it then for today. I hope you enjoyed this safari. I'm going to make some more of these if you'd like me to. Let me have your thoughts in the comments below. As always, thanks a lot for watching. Don't forget, if you haven't done already, to subscribe for the vibe. Think about a thumbs up, tickle that bell, and share the effect. See you soon. Bye.